Mountain biking isn't cheap. The bikes alone can cost nearly as much as a decent used car, and unless you're one of the lucky few, there's a good chance that your local trails are still a decent drive away. But over the past couple years, we at 99 Spokes have been seeing more and more value-oriented mountain bikes hit the market. And that's got us asking the question, are they any good? Well, spoiler alert, they are. And in this video, we've got the best sub $3,000 mountain bikes for XC, trail, enduro, and downhill riding. The bikes that rose above their peers to make it onto this list had a few things in common. First and foremost, they all have a really solid frame. Because let's face it, if you're buying a mountain bike in this price range, there's a pretty good chance that you will want to upgrade some of these parts down the road. And the last thing you want to do is bolt on some real nice parts to a real crappy frame. And speaking of parts, that's the second area that the bikes we're about to talk about really set themselves apart from others that come at a similar price. These bikes all have high quality suspension, drivetrain, brakes, and more. And one of the ways that a majority of these bikes were able to do that is by using what's called a direct-to-consumer or D2C sales model. What that means is that instead of buying the bike through a middle party like a bike shop or a distributor, you're actually buying the bike directly from the manufacturer. And this often means that you're going to be getting the most bang for your buck. But that's not to say that there's also some drawbacks. Probably one of the biggest is that you can't just cruise over to your local bike shop and take one of these bikes on a test drive. And speaking of bike shops, you're either going to need to pay one to build the bike up for you or have the mechanical know how to do it yourself because your bike's going to be arriving in a box. But even with these inconveniences, we still think that the direct-to-consumer model is a great option for people looking to get a new mountain bike. So it should come as no surprise that the first bike on our list of value mountain bikes is coming from one of the most popular direct-to-consumer cycling brands, Canyon. The Canyon Lux Trail CF6 is a 29-inch carbon fiber cross-country bike weighing just 26.8 pounds or 12.2 kilograms. And while this bike lists for $3,400, it's actually on sale right now for just $2,800. And you're gonna hear me say this a lot in this video, but that is an insane value. Starting off with the suspension, this bike is arguably the best suspension components of any bike on this list, beginning up front with the Fox 34 Step Cast Performance Fork with 120 millimeters of travel. Fox is also taking care of suspension in the back with 110 millimeters of travel delivered from the Float DPS Performance Shock. Shifting and braking are both going to be taken care of by Shimano with a full SLX drivetrain as well as the SLX M7100 brakes front and back. Lastly, the bike rolls on some DT Swiss X1900 spline drive wheels wrapped in Schwalbe tires. Moving on then to the geometry. And the trail part of the Canyon Lux Trail name signifies that this bike is a little bit more trail ready than the World Cup version, which leans a little bit more towards that XC race side of things. This means that this bike is going to be a little bit slacker with a head-tube angle of 67.5 degrees, as well as a pretty long reach of 460 millimeters in the size medium. All in all, the Canyon Lux Trail CF6 packs an incredible amount of value, especially considering the $2,800 sale price tag. And for that reason, we're gonna have to give this one 5 out of 5 goats. So if you're on the market for a XC or light trail bike, then this really is a great option, whether you're on a tight budget or not. Moving up in travel to the trail bike category, we have another German direct-to-consumer brand, but this time it's YT. And the bike we're talking about is the YT Izzo Core 2, which, just like the Canyon Lux, is on sale right now. The Izzo Core 2 lists for $3,200, but right now you can get it for just $2,700. This carbon fiber full suspension trail bike weighs just 31.7 pounds or 14.4 kilograms. And for that, you're gonna get 130 millimeters of travel front and back, both taken care of by Fox. The YT Izzo Core 2 has a SRAM NX drivetrain to get you going, and then some SRAM Guide 2 brakes to get you stopped again. Lastly, the bike has the Crank Brothers Synthesis XCT wheels wrapped in a kind of interesting tire choice. It has the Maxxis DHR2 in the front and in the back. Moving on to geometry then, and it should be no surprise that this bike is a decent bit slacker than that Canyon Lux we talked about, but don't worry, it's still definitely going to be an agile trail bike. The Izzo Core 2 is the only bike on our list with adjustable geometry. The way that works is there's a flip chip located in the rear triangle, and by adjusting that from the high to low setting, you can adjust the head tube angle by half a degree. In the high setting, this bike's gonna have a 66.5 degree head tube angle, and in the low setting, 66 degrees. It's worth noting that the Izzo has a relatively short reach of just 450 millimeters on the size medium, but for riders who are looking to upsize, it also has a super short seat tube at just 425 millimeters. So that shouldn't get in your way if you want to go for a bigger frame. So who is the YT Izzo Core 2 for? Well, honestly, if you prioritize having a carbon fiber frame and you want to spend less than $3,000 on your trail bike, then really there's not a lot of other options out there. For that reason, I have to give this bike 4 out of 5 goats. The only reason I didn't give it 5 is that SRAM NX drivetrain, which can tend to give riders some issues, but if you upgrade that derailleur and maybe the cassette to GX, then man, this bike is gonna ride like a dream. Moving on to enduro bikes, and we're gonna make a big jump here with bike number 3 because no longer are we talking about direct-to-consumer brands, and we're also not talking about carbon fiber anymore. In this case, we have the Ibis Ritmo AF GX, and it lists for $2,800. Let's break down that name because there's a lot going on there. First of all, Ritmo is a combination between Ripley, which is Ibis's kind of shorter travel trail bike, and the Ibis Mojo, which is their full-on enduro race bike. Next, you have AF, and that simply stands for alloy frame. This bike does have an aluminum frame, not a carbon frame. And then lastly, GX. Now, some of you might have guessed, that does stand for having a GX drivetrain, but before you get super excited, spoiler, it's not full GX. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Marzocchi is going to be taking care of the squishy bits on this bike with a 160 millimeter Marzocchi Bomber Z1 coil fork and 147 millimeters of travel in the back from a Marzocchi Bomber Air shock. Moving on to the drivetrain, and like I said earlier, you are going to get a little bit of that GX gold sprinkled in here. It does have a SRAM GX derailleur, but everything else on there is SRAM NX. SRAM also covers braking with the G2R brakes, and lastly, the Blackbird Send wheels wrapped with some super grippy Maxxis Assegai tires front and back. And with such aggressive components bolted onto this frame, it should be no surprise that it's got pretty aggressive geometry as well. The Ritmo AF has a 64.9 degree head tube angle and a reach on the size medium of 458 millimeters. Again, that's on the smaller side compared to some bikes that are on the market these days, but just like the Izzo we talked about earlier, this bike has a very short seat tube at just 382 millimeters in the size medium, so you shouldn't have any worries should you choose to size up. So to summarize, this Ritmo AF is a super interesting bike. Just like the name I talked about earlier, it kind of straddles between a super aggressive enduro bike and a more light, nimble trail bike. And to be honest, it's probably my favorite bike of the 4 on this list today. But the real question is, how does it score? Well, once again, I'm gonna give the Ritmo AF 4 out of 5 goats. I think this thing is pretty dang solid and would be a great option for anyone looking to get an enduro bike. We've made it to bike number 4, which means that we are on to the downhill bike. And we're gonna be going back to YT for this one. The bike we're talking about now is the YT Tues Core 2, which is on sale for $700 off right now, usually listing for $3,500, but right now you can get it for just $2,800. And for that money, you're gonna get a 200 millimeter bike park or race day ready downhill bike weighing 38.8 pounds or 17.6 kilograms. Those 200 millimeters of travel are taken care of by the RockShox Boxer Select fork, as well as the RockShox Vivid R2C shock in the back. Once again, SRAM is taking care of both drivetrain and brakes. You're gonna get the GX downhill drivetrain and the Code 2 brakes. They're both super solid and again, built specifically for a downhill bike. And lastly, not to be outdone by these other heavy-hitting components, this bike has some super burly wheels as well. They're the E13 LG1 downhill wheels, and they are wrapped in those same Maxxis Assegai tires. Moving on then to geometry, and the first thing that I should mention about this bike is that it does roll on 27.5-inch wheels front and back. That's going to make this bike a little bit more agile, a little bit more playful when taking it to the bike park, but it might be a little undergunned by other 29-inch downhill bikes should you do some actual downhill racing on it. What's not going to leave you feeling undergunned though is the super slack head tube angle at just 63.5 degrees. Lastly, it's got a relatively average, if not maybe a touch small reach for a downhill bike of 429 millimeters in the medium. Finding a downhill bike for less than $3,000 is pretty unheard of, and honestly, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to find one when we were planning this video. So the fact that you can even get this bike for this price, I feel like means it's an automatic 5 out of 5 goats. So if you're wanting to get into aggressive bike park riding, free riding, or downhill racing, and you're looking to get your first downhill bike, or maybe you're a seasoned veteran and you're just looking to upgrade what you currently have, then this YT2S Core 2 is absolutely an amazing bike for you. So there you have it, 4 outstanding mountain bikes, all for under $3,000. If you have any questions about these bikes, or really about any bikes in general, go ahead and leave those in the comments and I'll do my best to answer those. Another way to learn about some of your favorite bikes is to visit our website, 99spokes.com, where we've compiled the details of thousands of bikes into one easy-to-use tool. And lastly, remember that bikes are for everybody. Have fun out there.